Welcome to The Politics People. Joining us today is a legend. As a singer-songwriter, he's been a consistent presence in the music industry for the past 40 years. As an activist and commentator, he's a familiar face on things like The Andrew Marr Show, This Week, Panorama. He's had 6 appearances on Question Time and counting. I'm talking today to Billy Bragg. Thank you so much for doing this.
Lovely to be here, Paul.
Right, so the conceit of this show is that activists and pundits have had sort of more influence on world events over the past decade than elected politicians. Do you have any sense of the impact that you've had on policy and politics?
I'm not fond of stressing that. I think the idea that singer-songwriters can change the world is a very jaded 1960s idea. And it's not been my experience that it works like that either. I mean, if anyone can change the world, it's the audience. And my job is to kind of focus their activism, charge them up and send them out to change the world, because that was my experience. I was politicized by going to see The Clash at Rock Against Racism. And it was what I experienced there, not what The Clash were doing, but being in an audience with 100,000 kids just like me in solidarity with anti-fascism that sort of changed my perspective on the world to such an extent I probably wouldn't be talking to you today were it not for that. So I see that music has a role to play, but it doesn't have agency. You know, it's the audience that has agency, and the job of the musician is try to focus that and to sort of mix empathy and solidarity, empathy rather than activism to produce solidarity.
I didn't realise that the springboard for you, or the catalyst for you, was that Rock Against Racism experience, because that sort of chimes with what you ended up doing with probably, say, Red Wedge. It's just it's not so much the content of the songs, it's the presence of all these artists together.
Bringing people together and showing solidarity on stage that you hope will be reflected in the audience. And after the miners' strike in the UK, many of the bands that were in Red Wedge, we've been doing gigs together, and we were asking ourselves, what can we do next? What's do we just go home now? Do we just go back to being in smash hits? And we felt that, the next opportunity we had to do something about the situation was the 1987 election. And the only real vehicle for getting rid of Thatcher was the Labour Party, whether we liked him or not. So that's really what held Red Wedge together, was an anti-Thatcher vibe rather than a pro-Labour vibe. I was in the Labour Party, so I was fine. But other members were ambivalent about it for different reasons. And I've always understood that. I've never worried about that.
Do you get inundated with requests to bring attention to a movement or a cause?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's kind of it's ironic that during this lockdown period where all my gigs have been pushed into next year, I've never been more busy.
Wow, really?
Because loads of, not only are people asking me to get involved with a cause to raise money and do an online benefit, but all those festivals that have been closed down, they're doing online stuff as it is. I mean, when you broadcast this, it will have been gone by, but this coming weekend was Glastonbury weekend. So Greenpeace are doing an event, Glastonbury are doing an event, we're doing an event. And so, the ability to connect with people in the way that you and I are connecting now, which wasn't around back in the day, has made it possible to remain engaged with the process in a way that before, if we'd have all been shut down, if I couldn't speak to the NME, if I wasn't on Radio 1, then I would have had no opportunity to express my views on what's been going down, whether it's COVID or Black Lives Matter or whatever. But fortunately, now everybody has the opportunity to express their opinion.
Yeah, on a sidebar, you were kind of an early adopter of this whole technology and sort of becoming more of a one-man band and your own platform, if you like, is my reading of just on the showbiz side. You actually saw which way the wind was blowing well before a lot of other artists.
Well, actually, I saw which way the wind was blowing and went the other way. Because what I did in 1983 by coming out of an electric guitar and playing solo was a classic zag when everyone else was zigging, because it was a time of new romantics, serious haircuts, synthesizer bands, Soft Cell, Pet Shop Boys, those kind of bands. And I was kind of zagging back towards, not just back towards punk and the raw energy of that, but also in some ways to that 60s singer-songwriter vibe where you see that one person standing alone on stage focusing the audience attention. Nobody had done that for a while. So I was fortunate to in that switch to find some space there, which I was able to build on.
Yeah, even the Proclaimers needed like two blokes. Do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah, did. They had to rely on harmony. I've never had to do that, so I'm fortunate. I've just got by on musicality and haircuts.
Yeah, exactly. That's the title of your autobiography. Do you ever
Yeah.
wish it was? Do you ever wish it was just music? Do you ever not kept your mouth shut, but do you ever just get sort of bored of the association with good causes, or have you always seen them hand in hand?
Well, I think you know if you have a platform, you should try and do a little bit more with it than just sell people records, as if we could still do that,
Yeah.
But it's really great, I think, to have a job that you find meaningful. I've worked in a factory. I've done all sorts of strange jobs, but nothing has been more meaningful to me than using music to engage in the debate. Because back in the 20th century, music really was our social medium, although we didn't think of it in those terms because that concept wasn't around. But, the music you listened to told you how to dress, it told you where to go, it told you to hang out with and not to hang out with. Walking around with a 12 by 12 LP in your hand at school, you were sending a message as powerful as anything you ever posted on Facebook. And because of that, because it was our only medium, everything had to be contained in it. All human experience that young people were facing had to be contained in it, which included politics. So, if you were trying to work out what your politics were, you could get some hints, you could get some pointers from listening to particular bands in a way that you might now by following a particular writer or particular activist. You could do that with a band, Yeah. And so for me, when I was 19 and I felt angry about the world, the only option available to me to get my voice out was to learn to play the guitar, write songs and do gigs. Now, in the 21st century, in 2020, if you're angry about the world, you've got so many options that you can take up. Everything from, tweeting every day, doing a podcast. You can make a film on your smartphone and edit it, So music no longer has that vanguard role in youth culture. It's no longer the go-to place where people see their opinions reflected and come together in solidarity, whether it's emotional solidarity or political solidarity. But music still does have that role. It still offers people something they can't get online, which is a form of communion. And that's why I think once the shutdown is over, people will come back to gigs because they miss that thing where when you're in a crowd and everybody's singing your favorite song, your favorite artist is singing it, you're singing it, 1,000 other people are singing it. There's something there that you can't get that on the internet, And if that song has huge, it's freighted with huge emotional meaning for you for some reason, then there's a sense that whatever feelings you've invested in that song are kind of accepted by everybody. There's a joyous release in that, and that that aspect of it is good for your mental health, good for your sense of self. And, it makes you feel that you are not the only person who cares about this thing. And that, many of us feel very alone in the world. The digitization of culture has atomized us, and music can bring people together. And I think that's why, even though music is cheap as chips and you can get it anywhere for nothing, people want to come to gigs. They want that experience. They want to be in the crowd.
And there is that paradox, isn't there? Like you said, the music now is cheap as chips. But the festival scene, for instance, is bigger than it's ever been and is still exploding. People do want that communion. People still want that shared experience.
It's a very human thing, though, Paul. It's why they sing in church.
Yeah.
It's why they sing at the football. At football, men are struggling to express emotions that normally they wouldn't express to their nearest and dearest. So being able to sing a song at the top of their voice in release, whether they're winning or losing, offers them a way of channeling things that they perhaps can't articulate themselves, and obviously makes them feel they're not alone. Because if the whole of the North Bank is singing with you in joy or disappointment, in some ways the weight that you're bearing with that disappointment is shared with other people. We underestimate that. I mean, that's the real power of music. It's not the power to change the world. People unfortunately want music to actually change the world. My experience, it doesn't have agency. It's like asking a podcast to change the world. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah.
But it does have a power. And I think that's why people want it to change the world, because we've all felt the power of music. We've all had our emotions lifted by music. We've all felt that surge when everyone sings together at a gig. So we know it has a power, but we just wish it would go much, much, much further. And I think my role is to reflect that urge back onto the audience and say, if you really want agency, then you have to yourself find it and deliver it. That's that. I've seen that as my role for the last 20 years at least.
Yeah, well, it's an icebreaker, isn't it? Or it's truly a vehicle, really, music or film or anything like that. These are conduits by which you.
But music more. I think music more though, because in film, the currency of film is drama. The currency of music is empathy, because music is trying to get you to feel an emotion for someone you haven't met or experience something that you yourself may not have first-hand experience of. It's offering to share that with you. Or perhaps the empathy is coming the other way, that the songwriter has written something that really touches on a nerve that you have experienced. And then you can draw, instead of having to give your empathy to the song, you draw some empathy from that. And I think that's really important, particularly in these modern times when there appears to be a war on empathy, where anybody who has any expression of compassion for other people, particularly people outside their perceived group, is dismissed as being politically correct or woke or virtue signaling. Political correctness doesn't exist, Paul. There's no such thing as political correctness. There's no political party out there campaigning under the slogan, with a program like that. It's a trope that's used by reactionaries to police the limits of social change, to keep people away from the center of culture. And it's an unfortunate situation we find ourselves in with the culture wars, because what happens is those people, ordinary working people, whatever their politics, whatever their color, who no longer have agency over their lives because of the way neoliberal capitalism is set up, they're offered culture wars, a victory in a culture war, to make them feel as if they're on the winning side. Well, actually, economically, they're not on the winning side. And that's a distraction. Instead of focusing on the politician who's in control of the situation and could make a difference to their lives, they're encouraged by the use of tropes like political correctness to look at marginalized people and to blame them. This is a real disconnect in accountability in our system. And it's obvious in the United States of America with Donald Trump, but also I'm afraid it's true here with Boris Johnson as well, because he, like Trump, is a man who's never shown any responsibility in his private, public or political life. And I think that's dangerous to have in a leader.
It's so interesting. I've never heard it expressed that way before. You don't think there's any equal cynicism on the side of people expressing it that way, that wokeness is actually a hoax, a false flag that's being used to manipulate.
What is wokeness, Paul? What is it? Just explain to me what wokeness is, in your terms.
In my terms, and again, I'm only picking up from your using it. I wasn't throwing this in.
Yeah, of course. No. I'm just saying that you might have a better perspective on it than me, because obviously I see it as an attempt to delegitimize the aspirations of a certain segment of society, usually a marginalized section of society. And I include women and young people in that, by the way.
Yeah, so, I would say, from my point of view, I would say that the pinnacle of wokeness is that intersectionalism. I think wokeness is the classification of people by their gender, race, or subcategory.
What is intersection, Paul? What is intersectionality?
The intersectionality, my understanding again, is that it's the idea that only somebody from a particular subcategory of society is able to express any views about that subcategory.
No. I think you've got it wrong end of the stick there, mate. And I'm not wishing to have a go at you. That's not why.
No. I'm learning.
Intersectionality is why more people from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic community have suffered from COVID, have died from COVID in the UK. I don't know what it's like in the US, but a higher proportion of the population, the numbers of people of colour who have died in our country from COVID is out of all proportion to their presence in society. And that is because class intersects with colour. that the majority of those people are living in poorer areas where the healthcare is not so good. They feel that the system is racist towards them, so they don't want to go to the hospital because they fear that they won't get treated equally. There are also cultural intersections from their own immigrant background, where some of them live in, they don't speak English. And the point about intersectionality is it's not one thing that is putting them in that position. It's that there are a number of factors, and that these factors are systemic in society, and they all come into play to end the result with people of color dying disproportionately in our society. And you can't just say, oh, why does this happen? And intersectionality, it seeks to explain that. What you're talking about, I think, is cultural appropriation. That's a slightly different thing, and that's another debate to have, because there's lots of angles to that. But intersectionality isn't something that's a negative thing. It's a way of, it's a perspective. The thing about this, Paul, is that what is dismissed as wokeness is nothing more than a different perspective on the world. Okay. Because your definition of liberty depends on your perspective. During the American Civil War, both the North and the South believed that they were fighting for freedom. The North for the freedom of the slaves, the South for the freedom to keep slaves. So the implication of that is that liberty depends on your perspective. And what we've seen over the past few weeks with the death of George Floyd is an incredible change of perspective in the United States of America. When you see demonstrations in small town America for Black Lives Matter, something's different, isn't it?
Something's definitely shifted here.
Why do you think that is? Because a black man being killed by a white police officer is not an uncommon occurrence, isn't it? It's not as if we've never seen film of that before, sadly, shamefully. It's not something different this time. Do you know what that was?
Go on.
Oh, it's my personal sense of it. I think the killing of George Floyd and it makes me shudder to even talk about it in these terms and to say this to you, allowed us all for the first time to look into the face of a white police officer while he took the life of an unarmed black man. The look on Derek Chauvin's face when he looks at that young woman who's filming him. I mean, he must know that what he's doing is going to be spread around on social media. He must be aware of that. He cannot fail to have been aware. Yet what does he do? Nothing. Nothing at all. He's so sure that what he's doing, if people see it online, they will side with him. They will feel that what he's doing to put his knee on the neck of a black man for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until he loses consciousness, the white America watching that will feel that's justified. And what's happened this time is white America has looked into his face and seen something they've never, ever seen before. Something I fear, obviously I don't speak from experience, something I fear that people of color are used to seeing. And for the first time, white America has seen that. And that's why I think you're getting demonstrations in small town America. That's why NASCAR has banned the Confederate flag. That's why they're talking about changing Uncle Ben's rice. We've never seen that before. Yeah. We often see a cop shooting a black man in the back as he runs away. We see that all the time. It's shameful that we see it. It's horrific that we see it. But we never get to look into Derek Chauvin's face like that. And this is what comes to the nub of it for me. There are some kind of freedoms, Paul, that are dangerous. And the most dangerous of all freedoms is impunity. And you see it in the face of Donald Trump. You see it in the face of Boris Johnson. And I'm ashamed to say you see it in the face of Derek Chauvin. And I think that's why this time it's different. We've never seen that before. We've never seen that before. I mean, I can't go back and look at that now because I can see that image in my mind, and I personally can't go back and watch that footage anymore.
No, I think you're spot on there. I think there's something in the clarity of that video, in the professionalism, if you like, of the quality of the recording. You can really see the attitude of that cop. I don't know, is his name Chauvin? I can't quite pronounce it.
Shavin, I don't
Yeah.
know, but yeah, Officer Chauvin's face, yeah.
The look on
That
his
to me is that's the, obviously it's the death of George Floyd that is the watershed moment. But what makes this different, I think, is that cocksure sense of impunity that he has, that no one's going to touch him, that he's just going to walk away from this and it's going to have no effect on his life. Because anybody else caught doing that, your initial reaction would be to, oh, hang on a minute, this is real trouble for me if someone sees me doing this. No.
Because if you think just before that, I think a week before the Ahmaud Arbery incident,
Yeah.
but that never caught on in the same way that this did. There
Well,
was no doubt. There was no doubt in
the
public's mind.
In the Aubrey footage I've seen, you're a distance away.
Yes, exactly.
You're not in their face. It's Chauvin's expression, really, that I think, and I'm talking now in terms of white America and in the UK as well and elsewhere, but I think it's seeing that white America hasn't seen that face before. People of color in America, sadly, horrifically, awfully, are familiar with that face.
Yeah.
But,
I think you're right.
People who run NASCAR, the people who run NASCAR and the NFL, their own, for whatever, they are human. They are human people. Corporations are people.
Yeah.
Use a catchphrase. And I think, when you see that, then that's where you have to come up with that word that white people have to use, and that is, do Black Lives Matter? ? We have to add that "do" to the question, and we have to ask ourselves that question and then act appropriately if we believe that they do.
So I know we're from different sides of politics.
Of course, yeah.
One of the things I'm optimistic about, and like you mentioned, the corporations, like things like NASCAR changing its logo, etc. And you talk about agency. See, that's, I think, where the black population has a great deal of leverage. They have huge financial clout, and when that is focused, and it's been demonstrated to be very powerful.
But they shouldn't need to do that. They shouldn't need to do that, should they, Paul?
Yeah, but do you think that it should just be left to government?
Oh, I think no. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a good thing. I think these changes are a good thing, but it shouldn't take something as horrific as what happened to George Floyd.
Oh no, I wouldn't want.
To get those changes, to get those changes.
God,
and I think I'm broadly positive in the way that things are changing as well. In fact, I mean, I had to listen to that interview you did with Peter Hitchens, and he was. He's kind of. I mean, I like Peter. I've done debates with him on TV, and he's so reliable for me as a weather vane on whether we on the progressive side of politics are making progress. Because as long as he's as upset as that, there's hope. There's hope. I mean, he's a bit of an Eeyore. I mean, you were trying so hard to get him to accept that he had. I mean, maybe he not had the change that he wanted, but at least he's given some people a point.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do with this was Jonesy's Jukebox, but for politics. And with Peter Hitchens, I just wanted to get him on and tell him how influential I thought he'd been and how brilliant.
I appreciate that. From what I had to listen to a few others. I had to listen to some of those libertarian candidates because
you went to the candidates.
I have a trouble getting my head around what exactly libertarianism is, because it seems. I mean, again, we don't have it. We don't really have it in the UK. It's a bit of an American. But it seems to me to be a kind of like, it's like flat earth politics. It's whatever you fancy. That's the politics. There's no rigid, like anarchism, for all its failings, does have a sort of ideology around it, which, you can argue with, and it has a little bit of wriggle room here and there. But it, broadly speaking, there is a body of ideas. But I'd struggle to find any kind of libertarian tract that sets out the parameters of what it is.
My take on the libertarians, for what it's worth, and why it exists in America and perhaps not so much in Europe, is I think in Europe they always had a history of anarchism, if you like, and revolution, and in the States the history, you got to see, it's written in the Second Amendment. It's there as the the right to bear arms, etc. That's not so much about wanting to carry guns, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
that is an important part of it, but it's to carry guns to protect the citizenry from the government. There is something innate in the DNA of the United States where it's built on a suspicion of too much power focused in one government or one body's
Yeah.
hands.
Yeah, but do you think the government control us here, Paul? Do you think the government control the people in Sweden? You know, I don't. I think it's. I have a different view to it. I think that liberty in the United States of America is based around personal choice rather than fundamental rights, and that liberty alone, the right to do as you want to do, that alone is not, can't be the definition of freedom, because if freedom is the right to do whatever you want to do, then there is no better definition of freedom currently than Donald Trump's Twitter feed. You know, ultimately, there has to be, in a society that's cohesive, there has to be equality, because everybody has to have the right, and you have to respect the rights of others to express, to live the life they want to live. You've got to respect that. But then, if you've got those two there, if you've got liberty and equality, you then need some form of accountability to ensure that people don't overstep the mark in doing that. Because if you only have liberty and equality, the loudest voices will drown out the quieter people and impose their own sense of what's right and wrong on them. Ultimately, democracy is a bargain that we all enter into, and without accountability. And I'm afraid over the past few decades, I fear democracy has become more about choice and less about accountability, and that's why people feel they have no agency. I mean, I thought that the last election, people wanted change, and unfortunately, Hillary Clinton wasn't the change candidate, and she was just offering people more of the same, and they felt they had no agency, and they saw in Trump a possibility of getting some agency, so they voted for him.
I don't think this gets said often enough, that many of the people that voted Obama subsequently voted for Trump.
Yeah, because they wanted change. And if they can't get genuine change, which is what they thought Obama was going to give them, they will willingly vote for chaos.
Completely.
And in some ways, I understand that, because if you've lived all your life in the flyover states and you feel that people in Washington D.C. have messed your life up and made things really difficult for you, and you have an opportunity to mess their lives up and make them real difficult for them by electing a TV star, then I can understand the implication. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it gives those people anything other than a kind of the pleasure that you would get from kicking someone in the jacksie. But I can see where that impulse comes from.
For me, it's the whole of this in the UK, coming from Wales originally, seeing politics in the UK.
Oh yeah.
It's in the hands of very few who understand how the system works, how the gaining of power actually works, how to... Look, I mean, the fact that you can have people who know that going to Eton and then going to Oxford and doing PPE can convert into a cabinet secretary job, can convert into ultimately the prime ministership. It's like, as you were saying earlier, I'm not saying that, people in Sweden are controlled by the government. I'm just saying that the people who get into government have a history of being able to get into government. I think somebody was saying that I read somewhere that the same families that are controlling Florence, for instance, now were the same families that were controlling it 300 years ago. And I think feels the same in the UK. It's pretty much the same, the descendants of the same people who have access to power, and it's very agreeable, they're fairly benign, but the fact is they pass power down generation to generation. Like I said, I think it's a class thing, and I think that they understand how the shooting match works. I'm not saying it's rigged, but they do understand how the system works to their benefit, and I think many are excluded because they simply don't understand the machinery of power of government.
Yeah, but you know what happened this week with Marcus Rashford, right? Manchester United footballer.
Yeah, with the school meals during the summer.
He's a 20-year-old kid black kid with a Twitter account, can get the government to do a U-turn in 48 hours.
Yeah,
You know,
but that's
you
the
know,
new democracy. That's my point,
yeah,
though. It's just like we actually have the tools now with things like Twitter, with peer-to-peer
yeah,
communication, that these things were handed over every 5 years and were previously just, that kind of debate was always held in smoky back rooms. Now it's available online to everybody. It's
yeah.
X Factor voting, etc.
It is. I mean, obviously it has its upsides, its downsides. It kind of makes it, it makes bad actors capable of messing with people, and Twitter mobs to gang up on people who are vulnerable. Really, it shouldn't really be ganged up on. Or left or right. I don't think it's a right or left
Yeah,
argument.
no, I agree. I agree. But it's
And
like it's like the music industry, and I'm not trying to be crass and crowbar that in, but it went through a similar thing. There were, while the technology was in its infancy, you had. Just record companies could decide who to promote and who not to promote. The minute the technology, the Pandora's box opens, if you like, and the technology is available and shipped on every laptop, they don't have the control anymore. People can peer-to-peer decide who they like and who they don't like. And it's a bit of an anachronism now to have government or bureaucracy still trying to hold on to its previous power base, because it just doesn't have that. This is the whole thing of this podcast. It's like, people with a platform and a point of view like yourself are, I think, Farage and whoever are more powerful now than a lot of elected officers.
Yeah, it appears so, I think, but in truth, I think they still retain the power. But just despite that, things are changing. I mean, the young woman who shot the clip of George Floyd being killed, she was only 17.
Right.
Young people like Marcus Rasher, he's 22. They are challenging the over 40s.
Yeah.
Who've set the parameters for society, and I think that's where the culture wars are coming in, because those older people, they don't really want to relinquish the ability that they had to set the agenda. But young people, because of the democratization of opinion through social media, young people are now able not only to connect with one another, but to mobilize themselves. In the old days, we could be angry about Thatcher,
right,
but we really couldn't do anything about it, because the gatekeepers in the mainstream media kept us in the enemy and on top of the pops.
Exactly.
Nowadays, if you've got the right clip and you've got the right followers, then it is possible to connect. And I think that's what we're seeing with the recent uprising. It's all the connections that have built up over the last, I suppose it's 20 years really, since digitization, are now coming together, and younger and more people who are aware. And see, this is the awareness of how the world looks. That's what being woke is. I mean, I know it's used in a very dismissive way.
It's very pejorative now, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, unfortunately, which is a shame, because we want our young people to be aware of the world, and we want them to challenge the generation that went before them. That's their right. Their right is to come with another perspective on the world, another perspective on history, because those people who are trying to, pull down the statues, they're not trying to edit history. They're trying to ensure that both sides of history are told, and that history isn't whitewashed by putting up a statue in Bristol in England to a slave trader and say what a good guy he was because he gave some money to the poor. Cecil Rhodes, an imperialist, invented apartheid, and yet the Rhodes Scholarship kind of whitewashed, no pun intended, his reputation. And it's right that young people should question that. We want our young people to be questioning. We don't want them to be accepting everything that their elders tell them, because they have a different perspective. And now they can talk to each other, so watch out.
Exactly. Well, this is my very shallow take on all this. And again, I'm nearer libertarian than I am anything else. It's like, well, that's market forces working right there. That is the power of the, they are voting with their feet.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you want to talk about the free market of ideas, the people who are perhaps more right wing here, they're trying to keep other opinions marginalized. They don't want to hear other opinions. That's what political correctness is about. It's about dismissing and delegitimizing the opinions of others and keeping them in their place. If there really was a free market of ideas, then they wouldn't need to be using such terms, because in that sense, in the economic sense, if we can use that metaphor, accusing people of political correctness is a form of intellectual protectionism that stops other ideas coming in and making your position look untenable. Because in that free market of ideas at the moment, Donald Trump and his followers, their stock has dropped in the last 2 weeks since George Floyd was killed. Their stock has dropped precipitously.
Sweeping generalization, though, but how can I say, that same crowd, that same group, that same point of view that you're saying would be marginalized, surely just a couple of years ago they were no platforming everybody. Isn't this some sort of backlash to the no platforming culture that took over a few years ago, 2016, 17 kind of?
Well, it depends what you think no platforming is. The way I see it, no platform is a form of accountability.
Yeah.
If you're running a bar and some guy comes in every night to start a fight, you're going to ban him, aren't you? Well, you're going to say, look, mate, I'm sorry, but your behaviour is counter to the rules in this bar, and I'm afraid you can't come in here anymore. And no platform is very often used by people whose whole MO is provocation. People who are only coming to wind up the students there, to get some clicks, to get some attention. And what a safe space is about, it's not about censoring the debate, it's about policing the tone of the debate. Because what a safe space does is it ensures that everybody gets to speak, that everybody gets respected, and everybody takes responsibility for what they say and what they do. They're the parameters in which a safe space operates. And that's no different to the average workplace, has similar rules through it.
Yeah, but okay, listen, the bar.
And if you had a bar, you'd have similar rules, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, if you had, but I think that's a good distinction. If you have a bar, I'd say that's a private place of business, and you can set your own rules, within reason. But a lot of the no platforming, and again, I don't want to bog you down with this because I'm kind of interested in how the whole thing ticks. But if you take something like the no platforming, that was happening in public institutions, that one way or another, if somebody doesn't like their point of view, that person with the unpopular point of view is actually still out of their taxation paying for those public bodies like universities, etc.
Yeah.
And
somebody
is taking that away. Now, I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying, isn't this the obverse of the same coin?
Freedom of speech doesn't give you the right to be listened to. It gives you the right to say what you want to say. And all those people who've been no platform spend the next 6 months ranking up the clicks by writing articles for national newspapers claiming to have been silenced. I mean, it's just beyond.
Listen, I don't disagree with you. I think it's what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander myself. All I'm saying is that you're sticking up for the wokes, and I'm like,
I'm sticking up for a new generation who have a different perspective, and if you're going to come onto their turf, and let's say the university campuses are their turf, then you have to play by their rules. If they come on into your space, you would expect them to play by your rules, and that's where. I think what's happening is what previously seemed to only be on the campuses is now starting to move through the institutions as well. You can't call NASCAR woke, can you? Let's be honest.
No, but it is a commercial organisation, and that's the point I make, is that commercial organisations are susceptible to pressure, and pressure targeted in the right way can actually affect change. It's like you get this anomaly where I think the highest paid entertainment executive in the world, usually anyway, is Tyler Perry, who makes the Medea films. And he's, predominantly successful in the black community, certainly in the US, but probably worldwide. Yeah. And it's made him the highest paid executive in the world. You always had this. You had the highest paid executives, I remember, or the highest paid people in entertainment used to be people like, Oprah, Michael Jackson, Eddie Murphy, Bill Cosby back in the day. That was the black community, certainly in the United States, was always very powerful as a commercial community, commercial lobby, if you want. And I think having said that, the bit we could agree on, I think, is that I thought that it's certainly in the UK, when students had to start paying to go to university, there's like 9,000 a year for the courses, and they were going into massive debt to pay for these courses. I thought that it would be an end, if you like, to student activism. They would be much more focused on the actual academic studies in the pursuit of a career, because they were going to get massively into debt, and this was going to motivate them to concentrate on work as opposed to any kind of protest or social activism. And it's actually gone the opposite way.
Yeah.
It seems to have had the effect that students, because they feel literally invested in their universities, they are physically paying out $9,000 a year, they actually do feel ownership of these institutions, and are much more vocal about saying who they do not want visiting their seats of learning.
Yeah. Yeah, and rightly so, I think. But it always was the way, Paul. It was this way in the 80s when I was playing on the campuses. It was definitely that in the 60s. If you go back before that, each generation that comes along has a different perspective on what's gone before, and those generational lines are often there. The big political divide on Brexit is not left or right; it's old and young.
Yeah,
it's young people who want to remain in the European Union, old people who want to leave, and I think that's reflected in some ways in the United States of America as well with Trump. So, it's sort of that's where the dynamic is now. And that's why I suppose culture wars are more where politics is played out, because that's in culture. Culture is where the front lines are. That's where, it's all about symbolism, isn't it? It's all about statues of slavers and whose flag gets to fly.
Exactly. Have you ever been swayed by any of the populist arguments?
Such as?
Well, things like, obviously Brexit, Trump, any of the issues that came out during those debates. Have you ever been sort of like tempted? Because, you're a working class man.
Yeah. And,
working class roots and working class family. You must hear every single, music industry, entertainment, etc.
Yeah. I know my Kipling, Paul.
Quite.
I'm up to speed on that. I can do that as well as Jabberwocky. But no, I think populism is a bit of a catch-all term, really. Right. If we're going to define it, I would say populism is defined by political leaders who only want to give you good news. And you can see in the who the populists are at the moment, I think, simply by looking at the rates of death and infection of COVID-19 around the world, because those countries who are led by men who don't want to give bad news, Trump, Johnson and Bolsonaro, are the top three. I think that's a real fundamental problem about the way politics has become less about accountability and more about putting in someone who, looks like they might, say positive things. People so want to hear positive things. Boris Johnson talks about the test and trace program that he's rolling out. He never mentions it without saying world beating.
Right.
As if that matters. You really want one that's effective, don't you? And the fact is that they haven't managed to set it up for all that. They've abandoned the app now, and we're starting to go into come out of lockdown without a proper test and trace system in place, which is a little bit concerning for a lot of people. So, populists, because while Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, they were saying he was a populist as well. I don't think he was a populist. He was something else. He was part of that people wanting change thing, I think. I think he became leader because he was the only leader who looked like he'd really changed the Labour Party. The other candidates were more Blairism. So he was part of that impulse. But I don't believe he was a populist. Because sometimes populism just becomes a word for people who don't believe in neoliberalism. And I don't think that's right. I think it's a bit more complicated than that.
Would you, again, this is total sidebar, but would you have been okay with a Labour going in with a Brexit supporting manifesto in 2019 if it got Corbyn elected?
No, I wouldn't. I think that would have been. I don't think they could have got elected on that anyway. I think they would have just split. The whole point about Brexit is it's a wedge issue for the Tories. The Tories have no ideology anymore. They've kind of given up that. And it's a wedge issue that allows them to wrap themselves in the Union Jack and appeal to a certain demographic who is aware that Britain's position in the world is declining and doesn't like the idea of having to share sovereignty with other European nations just because of neoliberalism. So I don't think anybody could have beaten the Tories or going to bat for Brexit in the way they did. But conversely, the two, although they have no ideology, they do have two guiding principles, the Tories. And those two principles fall on either side of Brexit because they are sovereignty and free trade. Right. And if you're going to do Brexit, you're going to have to trade one for the other. You can't have the complete sovereignty that the Tories are talking about and have free trade with our nearest neighbour, which is the European Union, where 45% of all our exports go to. So I think that's far from a done deal, Brexit. It could yet come around and bite them in the arse.
No, I agree with that. I think there's many a slip twixt cup and lip. I'm not going to be satisfied that the whole thing is completed until it's completed, until the actual deal's done and we're out. But I wanted to ask you about Tony Benn, because I know that you share similar views on many topics to him.
Yeah.
But that the fact that he was an avowed Eurosceptic, how do you square that?
I think he was an avowed Eurosceptic in the 1960s and 1970s. I'm not sure he would have been an avowed Eurosceptic now. I think he would have recognised the nationalist element within Brexit. I think he would have found he was a great believer in democracy.
Yeah,
that was his line,
Yeah.
But I think he would have realised that there is democracy in the European Union. It's just not the same democracy as what we have. And the problem is that the national governments in the Council of Ministers won't allow the European Parliament to make policy. That's where the fundamental problem is. So I think, and
that's that was my only problem with the whole thing. Weirdly, I would have voted to remain if it's that one thing. It's like you're telling me it's a parliament, and actually it's not a parliament, and that's for the only policy making unit to be an appointed chamber.
It's not appointed. No, it's elected. It's elected, but it doesn't.
The commission's appointed.
The commission's appointed. Yeah, but that's appointed by the commission's appointed by the elected heads of governments in each country. So there is a democratic element in that.
That's true.
But the parliament itself is not in control. That's the thing.
Yeah.
There's anomalous in the European Union that's different from the United States of America and European democracy. Is that the parliament is just one part of an ever-changing kind of musical chairs thing, but we do get to vote for them. It's not right to say the European Union is not democratic. It's not just democratic enough.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I've never said it's not democratic. I definitely
no. That was one of the arguments in the debate.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah, I didn't think you were citing me, but yeah, it's and it for me, it's one of those strange little frustrations. It's like, look, I can definitely see the upside of it. I get how good it is to have that huge block, and I just found it very frustrating that there was that one anomaly and they wouldn't address it. But if we'd have got into Europe at the very beginning when we had the opportunity, that would, we would have had the full democrat. We would have actually been sort of forming the whole thing as opposed to coming in the early 70s.
Well, we've never really been properly engaged, have we, in the European Union? I mean, my theory is that if you look at all the other nations in the European Union, every single one of them has either been a small nation whose clout has been enhanced by joining the Union, so Denmark or Ireland, or there have been countries escaping totalitarianism or dictatorship or occupation. Every single country, there's been no country that didn't have a dictator, wasn't invaded, didn't succumb to totalitarianism. Mm-hmm. The only country in the European Union who fits into that is the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
So we never saw joining the Union as being able to put our history behind us. We came to the table with our history. And unfortunately, our history is an imperial history.
Right.
And as a result of that, our imperial perspective, when Boris Johnson sits down with 27 other heads of state and has to share power with them, there's a terrible feeling somewhere in his stomach that he's part of somebody else's empire. And unfortunately, our past has left us in this kind of sort of post-imperial sense of exceptionalism that we haven't quite thrown off. And I think that really was the subtext of our leaving the European Union.
Did you, just along the way, with the amount of interface you've had with the political parties, were you ever approached to stand? Have you ever been tempted to?
Yeah, I've had a lot. Stand, House of Lords, all that.
No, you were offered the House of Lords?
Yeah. Well, I've been campaigning for a long time to abolish the House of Lords. And so they were saying to me, if you go in there, you can abolish. I'm like, get out. Don't be stupid. You think I'm going to fall for that? Forget it. So, no, I mean, I've got a job that I do, and people really like me. If I wanted to be hated by people, I'll become a traffic warden or something like that. Why become a politician? Because I've worked with politicians. They never see their kids. They never, they're always at everyone's beck and call. You wouldn't pay me to do that job. No. And also the other thing, and I think this is important, Paul, politics shouldn't be left to politicians. It should be open to everybody to put their 2 pence in from whatever perspective they had. So, to imagine that just because someone's interested in politics, they should be politicians. It's like imagining everyone who wants to go for a swim should be a fish.
Well, yeah, but it goes back to where we started, really, as you're saying, if you've got a platform, that's the thing. It's just like you have got a platform.
Yeah. And I do my best to use it to the best of my abilities, to engage with the world and try and, as Malcolm X said, by any means necessary, whether I'm making a record, doing a gig, I've been writing an article today, I'm talking to your listeners now. I'm trying to offer a different perspective, because I think, I keep coming back to this word perspective, because what brings change is a different perspective. And I think the death of George Floyd has been a watershed in that sense, because it's given a lot of people, particularly a lot of white people, a different perspective on the experience of people of color. And it's allowed them for the first time to see maybe just the outline of structural racism in society, and a lot of people who I think, good people who are against racism, but have always thought it was just a matter of a few bad apples here and there. Right. I've actually seen that the whole structure is fundamentally built in a way that is determined to discriminate against people of color. And I think that's a change of perspective that is really, really, it's serious, and it's not just in America. It's reverberated around the world. In some ways, it's the reaction to Trump, in the way that Trump was the reaction to Obama. Mm-hmm. I think this is the reaction to Trump.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, I think you've summed it up beautifully. I can't thank you enough for coming on today. It's just been an absolute privilege. Thank you.
Good to shoot the breeze with you, mate. Nice to have a chat with you.
Ditto.